Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. I do need to mention that this webinar is being recorded, so it can be made available on the GHS YouTube channel. But it is 3 o'clock, so let's get started. Welcome to Developing a Successful Historical Marker Application. This webinar is presented by the Georgia Historical Society to help give you a better understanding of the Georgia Historical Marker Program in general and the components of the application process for applying for new markers.
All right, and to get us started, I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Elyse Butler, and I am the marker manager here at the Georgia Historical Society. Today is actually my 8th anniversary here at the Georgia Historical Society, and that means I've been working with the marker program for that long.
And my name is Sabrina Saturday, and I'm the Marker and Outreach Coordinator for the Georgia Historical Society. I help coordinate the marker maintenance program and work with applicants who are applying for new markers.
Okay, great. So thanks, Sabrina. So before we get started, I just wanted to touch base with y'all about the Georgia Historical Society and what we are, who we are, and what we do. So the Georgia Historical Society was founded in 1839 in Savannah. We have always been headquartered here. We operate a research center, Hodgson Hall, which is the top photo on this slide. It is newly renovated and open to the public. So if you have any research needs, please feel free to come see us. Our mission is to collect, examine, and teach Georgia history. And we do that not only through our research center, but also through our programs like the Georgia History Festival and the Georgia Historical Marker Program, which is a wonderful program that is statewide. It is a, it is a statewide program with over 2,200 historical markers across the state, both the older historical markers and the newer historical markers. So under the umbrella of the historical marker program with these older historical markers, which are categorized by the green and gold historical markers with the Georgia State seal on the top, we are tasked with the maintenance and care of these historical markers since 2015. So we coordinate that. And what type of issues do we usually see? We see markers that need cleaning. We see markers that need post replaced. We see markers that themselves need to be replaced because they've been damaged or have gone missing. So that's just a brief overview of the marker maintenance program.
And if you aren't sure about your marker application topic yet, but you know that you want to be involved with the marker program, you can also go onto our website and fill out the Adopt a Historical Marker form and let us know if there's a specific marker that you want to keep an eye on. But you can also let us know if you just want to get involved with the program in cleaning markers, helping us repair them if needed, and we would love to work with you.
Thank you, Sabrina. So to get us started with the regular marker program, just wanted to give you a brief overview. These new historical markers that are erected by the Georgia Historical Society that are part of the Georgia Historical Marker Program are characterized by the black historical marker plaque and the silver lettering. And just to show you a few examples across the state, these are several that we have done recently. Primus King and the Civil Rights Movement, the March to the Sea, Villa Rica Explosion, and Birthplace of Coca-Cola. So all across the state. Now, to get yourself familiarized with the marker program, if you have not already, and I'm guessing that you have since you're here at this webinar, I just want to give you a good page to start off with, which is georgiahistory.com/markers, and that will bring you to the marker webpage on the GHS website. From here, you can look up all the historical markers across the state with the Explore Georgia Historical Markers box. You can assist us with maintenance and view our frequently asked questions and special initiatives like the Georgia Business History Initiative and the Georgia Historical Society's Civil Rights Trail. And most importantly, the reason why you're here today, applying for a new historical marker.
So if you click on that applying for a new historical marker link, you will be brought to this web page, and it gives you a checklist of all the components to be included with your marker application. The application is online. We do not have paper applications available, and the deadline is July 1st every year. It will close this July 1st, but it will also reopen in January 1st of 2023. So once you visit this website, you'll want to make sure that you are reviewing the application checklist so that you are submitting everything that we look for. We also have examples and tips available for you. And if your application is approved, although we are only able to approve a limited amount of applications each year, there is a cost with the approved marker applications. It is $2,500. The sponsors would be responsible for paying that, and GHS would be responsible for paying the other half of that, for a total of $5,000. And if you have any questions throughout the application process, you can feel free to contact me. My email is available at the bottom of the screen. And you can also send me your application materials for feedback as well. And I will give you just basic feedback based on my experience working with the committee, and let you know if you're kind of headed in the right direction or if there's any things that they might have questions about when it's time to present your application.
Thank you, Sabrina. And make sure that you stick around at the end of this webinar. We will have the opportunity for a Q&A. So you don't want to miss that, because we look forward to talking to you and answering those questions. So when you start working on your application, the first thing you need to do, of course, is to identify your topic, whether it be a person, place, or event. If the topic is an event, you need to ask yourself, did the subject happen longer than 25 years ago? If so, then that event is eligible for a historical marker. If the topic is a person, they should be deceased for at least 25 years, or there is a period of significance more than 25 years ago. And so that period of significance means the majority of that person's life work, or the work that they are most known for, did that happen 25 years ago? And if the topic is a place that is associated with a structure, is that structure more than 50 years old? Another thing you should ask yourself, and this is a big point, is does your topic have an immediate and apparent connection to state or national history? So you should ask yourself, does this topic rise to a significance beyond the local level? Because this is a statewide marker program, we do need to make sure that there is that strong connection to state history. And one thing when you're starting to research your topic, I think it would be beneficial for applicants to really look at what else is going on at the time period of your topic, whether it be a person, place, or an event. History doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are outside factors that are shaping this event or person. So it helps not just to research that topic, but also what else is going on. So when the Georgia Historical Society is looking for marker applications, we are looking for applications on topics that have, one, not been marked yet about Georgia history, but also some of the underrepresented topics like the civil rights movement or women's history, pop culture, histories of other underrepresented groups, and business and industry. So those are potential topics of interest to not only GHS, but the committee as well. And recently approved applications in the past couple of years have been across the state over a wide variety of topics. This spring, we will be dedicating historical markers on Willoway Recreation Area in Barrow County. Barrow County, Willoway is the first comprehensive recreational area for people with disabilities in the United States. Ebo Landing in Glenn County focuses on Gullah Geechee oral tradition that was based in a actual historic event involving the mass suicide of enslaved people. Bowers versus Hardwick in Fulton County, which covers a landmark case in the gay rights movement. Lillian Eugenia Smith in Rabun County, who was a prolific Southern author, feminist, and civil rights advocate, as well as University and Techwood Homes in Fulton County, which includes the first two public housing developments in America. And the previous year, we also approved the Jodytown community, which looks at the African-American laborers at the Warner Robins Air Force Base in Houston County, Vines Royal Funeral Home in Chatham County, which puts in context the post-Reconstruction funeral and burial homes in the South and their need for segregation between the two, the development of a white funeral home versus a Black funeral home, and the impact that has had on African-American history. Amanda American Dixon Toomer in Richmond County, which focuses on Mrs. Toomer in Richmond County, who was once one of the most wealthiest female and African-Americans in the United States. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in Decatur, which is where in DeKalb County, where he was held and tried before being sentenced to harsh labor down in Reidsville, causing an upset and involvement of the Kennedys. And then Silvertown Historic Mill Village in Upson County. And this mill village was a model village, but also home to B.F. Goodrich and tire manufacturing.
So when you're ready to submit your application, you'll scroll down to the bottom of that checklist and you'll click submit an application and you'll be brought to submittable. You want to select that first option, click submit. If you have an account with Submittable, you can go ahead and sign in to access the form. But if you have not, you'll want to select sign up, add your email, password, first and last name, and you should be all set to go. So since I have an account, we will go ahead and sign in. And here you'll see where you can add the marker's title. You will also need to add a summary and some additional information that's not included on the checklist. So it is important that you don't wait until the last minute to look at the application, because you wouldn't want anything to sort of come up at the last minute and feel the need to rush through it. So another main component of your historical marker application is the documentation worksheet. So this worksheet is what the committee would use if your application is approved to create the first draft of text for your historical marker. So you'll want to outline the 10 facts that you find the most important to you, because that's what's going to be reflected in the marker. And you can feel compelled to want to add as much information to the documentation sheet as possible, because you don't want to, leave something off. But take what you're reading in your sources and try and summarize it into about a sentence or two. And keep in mind that historical marker text can only be about 130 words once it's finalized. So the more you can kind of cut back the information now, the easier it will be to finalize the text later on. You'll want to make sure that you include your citation information as the source and how you accessed the resources, so that when we go through and take a look at your facts, we're able to kind of verify them and make sure that everything is correct. It's also highly recommended that you fill in all 10 facts, if possible, at least 8 or 9 of them, because you want to demonstrate to the committee that there is enough of this information that it warrants a historical marker. If you are able to sort of cram everything into one sentence, then what are you going to do with all the extra words of marker text? So the most important component, or arguably the most important component of your marker application, is the research paper. Your research should be original and written for the purpose of this application. So if you do have sources from your organization that have already been written, you should certainly look at that as your starting point for this paper and sort of pull from that while also looking at other resources. The committee does like to see a range of primary and secondary sources, as well as recent and historical sources. So if your subject happened in the 18th century, you'll want to see if there's anything you can find from that time, not just references to your subject from the 21st century. In your research paper, you should also make sure that you are outlining the significance beyond the local level, like Elyse mentioned before. And if possible, you'll want to connect it to state and or national themes so that the historical marker is telling the local story, but people can walk away from it having a better understanding of how your local history fits into Georgia and American history. We recommend that the research paper is no more than 4 pages double spaced. It can be less if you don't double space. And it should also include either footnotes or endnotes and a bibliography at the end. And you can use any citation style for these as long as it's consistent. So MLA, APA, Chicago, whichever you feel most comfortable with. And as you're writing this paper, try to imagine that the Historical Marker Review Committee doesn't know anything about your subject. So you'll want to make sure that you provide a detailed synopsis of your subject's contributions to Georgia history. So add some context in the beginning, how did your subject come to be? And then what did they leave behind that influenced Georgia or American history after they left or after the event concluded?
Thank you, Sabrina. So one of the questions we get asked a lot is, how do I begin my research? And that's where we can help you a lot. So one of the places, obviously, we recommend that you start is with us at the Georgia Historical Society. If you're in Savannah or near Savannah, you could always come into the Research Center to do your research in person. We are open Wednesday through Friday, 10 to 5 p.m. and the first and third Saturdays of each month. But if you can't make those hours, or if you're in another part of the state, we do have online research guides. So if you go to, you see the screenshot of our website under the research tab, which is that first tab you see, there's additional resources and links. From here, you can look at our subject vertical files, our guides and orientations, and you can search our collection and digital images, and that might be a good place to start. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina to tell you about a few other resources you might want to consider.
So you should also consider oral histories, especially if your subject was within a time where you can still talk to people who were able to either work with that subject or got to experience your subject. And these should be considered as supplemental resources. We don't recommend that you build your entire research paper around oral histories because memory can fade, it can be adjusted, you forget things, and we understand that, but we have found that these oral histories add a more personal level to research papers that it really gets the reader engaged. I am a huge fan of Georgia historic newspapers, and any sort of newspapers, they are a great resource for getting a better idea of not only your subject, but what else was going on at the time of your subject. You can also access your local public library or your local historical society's archives, and they should have a wealth of information available for you if it's a local subject. You can, if you live near a college or university, they typically house a lot of local resources that could be accessed for your research, and online libraries as well. The Library of Congress has millions, I'm sure more than that, maps and journal entries. They even have newspapers. You can also narrow it down a little bit more by looking in the Digital Library of Georgia, which includes collections from your local public libraries and even, I believe, some college and university libraries as well, and even some of the items that are housed here at GHS. And finally, you could also try searching through the Digital Public Library of America, which is, again, like the Digital Library of Georgia, but on a much larger scale.
Thank you, Sabrina. So what do you do after your subject has, you have submitted your application, which is always a great feeling when you hit submit on Submittable. So there is a bit of a lead time with the Georgia Historical Marker Review Committee. The annual meeting of that review committee occurs every year in August. And the Georgia Historical Marker Review Committee is comprised of independent scholars across the state with varying areas of expertise. So this allows us to have a well-rounded panel of scholars reviewing your applications. Now, while they do meet in August, you will typically be notified in early to mid-September about the status of your application. So one of the questions on the application is, who is your primary contact? And that is the person that you should list that will be the point of contact for GHS for any question or concern regarding your application. So that result letter will go to that primary contact. Now, if your marker is approved, then everyone's happy, of course. The typical timeline for completion from that point, though, is 6 to 12 months. And so we begin work, we create a timeline and work with the sponsoring organizations of that historical marker. Each marker has to have, an individual can apply for a marker, but they must have an organization that is supporting that historical marker. And that basically allows us to ensure the perpetual care of the historical marker. All markers will be dedicated by the following June 30th. So that allows us to get ready for that next application cycle. So that's why we say 6 to 12 months. Sponsors of approved applications, the only thing outside of that cost share portion that you are required to fund is the installation of the historical marker, whether that be done by volunteers or you hire a contractor to do that, that would be up to you. And then there are some additional costs associated with the dedication of the historical marker if the sponsors choose to, provide food or beverages following the dedication, like a reception. Now, the cost share amount that is due is not due with the application, and we will submit an invoice to the sponsors after approval of the historical marker. So the sponsors, if you're approved, that invoice does not need to be paid until the marker text is finalized and we are ready to go into production. But if your application is not approved, GHS will work with you. A revise and resubmit is not a flat out rejection. A revise and resubmit letter is that the committee saw that your subject was worthy. However, they had a few questions that were left unanswered. And basically we will advise you on their comments and where you might find additional sources. So if you choose to revise and resubmit your application, you have up to 2 additional times to do so. So in total, you are allowed to apply for that subject for 3 years in a row. And, you know, we do highly encourage that you work with us throughout the process, whether it be with a new historical marker or revising and resubmitting for the next round. And so as Sabrina mentioned, that if you do submit for this year's review, the marker application closes on July 1st at 11:59 p.m., but it will reopen again at midnight, well, 12:01 on January 1st, 2023. So we encourage you to work with us in this process.
All right, that concludes the presentation portion of this webinar. If you have any questions, you can send them in the chat and Elyse and I will answer them now. But if you have more specific questions about your application, you can also feel free to contact us by email, which are listed there.
And we are going to stop sharing our screen so you can see us and we can actually interact. I will be reading the questions out loud and Sabrina and I will be answering them together. So hello, everybody. It is great to see you. Our first question here comes from Ms. Singleton. It said, on average, how many markers are approved each year? And do we have a quota regarding the approval of markers?
So each year we are typically able to approve 5 historical markers. That is based on funding and resources that we receive from the state of Georgia, and also just the amount of markers that we're able to handle, in addition to all of our other marker projects.
Okay, good question, Gary. Gary asked, who decides what goes on the signage? So this is something that we at GHS and the Georgia Historical Marker Review Committee work together to craft an initial historical marker text. We will then give that to the sponsoring organizations as a proposal, and we welcome their edits and feedback. And we work together to make sure everybody is happy with the final product. Now, there are a few things that GHS, does have to follow. It is a statewide program, so there are certain style guides that we do implement. But it's not just one person deciding what goes on the text. It's a joint effort with GHS and the community involved. Okay. Let's see here, we've got another question. All right. How do we go about redoing a marker? There is an older marker that needs to be updated and possibly moved to another location. Great question, Betty.
So to relocate a marker, I would recommend sending me an email. And if you have the title of that marker and an idea of where you think it should be relocated, you can add that in the email as well. And we will go through the marker's text and make sure that the proposed location is both accessible and historically relevant to the marker. So some markers, for example, say this house is a mile from here. And if you are proposing we move that marker 4 miles away, then it would no longer be historically correct, or just wouldn't be correct. And if there is a problem on the marker, it is our policy to not change the marker's text, although we do go through them if it needs to be replaced, to update language, to phrases and terms that we would use today that were not used in the 50s or 60s whenever the marker was cast. So I would recommend reaching out to Elyse or I, and we can get started on that.
Yeah, it's, throughout the marker program, whether erected by the Georgia Historical Society, the Georgia Historical Commission, or DNR, it is the policy of GHS not to change the interpretation of historical markers. Now, if there's an inaccuracy of the historical marker, we will of course address that. But if it is something that you just don't like what it says, then that's in a different case. But as Sabrina said, contact us. Each case is different. And we also encourage an application for another historical marker, one that will make a more well-rounded story, more well-rounded and detailed history. That is also an option as well, kind of adding to the narrative rather than taking away. So real quick, before I get to a couple other questions, I see one is about the word limit itself. Is 130 words the maximum? 130 words is what we aim for, and this does not include the title of the historical marker or the erected by language at the bottom that will say erected by the Georgia Historical Society and the sponsoring organization or organizations. This is what we found to be the limit that makes the marker legible, and it looks nice. You could go a little bit on either side, but 130 is what we aim for. Okay. All right. Our next question is, how do you work out siting the markers, particularly if the best location is on a public right-of-way?
So would that be in a GDOT right-of-way, do you think?
Yeah, I would say either the GDOT right-of-way or the county right-of-way. It's kind of the same process, right?
Right. So if it were on city or county property, you would need to contact your city and county offices. For GDOT, you would have to contact your local GDOT office, and you can find they have local offices, and it's sort of divided up based on your region on their website. And just to make sure that it is in an appropriate location. And you would also need to see if you need a breakaway post for your marker. So that allows, if we hope nothing happens to these markers, but if for some reason it were to get hit, that allows the marker post to break away and causes less damage to the car or whatever might have hit it.
All right, that's a good answer. And also with GDOT, and sometimes with the counties and cities, there's not really a blanket statement we could say for each city and county across the state. It seems to vary. But oftentimes they will not give you permission until they see the final marker text, which is okay. They just need to say they agree to discuss, or they're not going to revoke. We do encourage that the marker is situated in a spot where it is safely accessible, which means that you don't have to worry about your safety from vehicular traffic if you want to pull over and read it. So I hope that answers your question. If not, you feel free to follow up with more. There is another one that came in that kind of goes off that, Sabrina, when you were talking about a marker getting damaged by a vehicle. Claire asked in the chat, have we had issues with markers being vandalized and what happens if this occurs? This is where we rely on the citizens of Georgia across the state to notify us if acts of vandalism has happened. Now, we do see a lot of typical wear and tear that may be interpreted as vandalism. Usually it's on the older historical markers post with metal sheathing that is wrapped around the concrete being torn away. And that's unfortunately part of the just lawn work and the right-of-way usually. And part of the reason why we now use aluminum post. Now, there are instances where historical markers are intentionally vandalized. A lot of these vandalized markers can be repaired pretty easily. If somebody tags it or puts spray paint on it, you can typically, if it is fresh, get it off If not, we may have to consider refurbishing those historical markers. If they are damaged by gunshot, typically it does have to be recast. Now, in the case of the Georgia historical markers where we work with a sponsoring organization, if the marker does have to be replaced due to vandalism and accident, nature related, we live in the South, you never know what type of weather you're going to have. We re-enter into the cost share with the sponsoring organization to cover the replacement cost of that marker.
One way to sort of help mitigate vandalism is to kind of consider that when you're looking at the location you want to place the marker. If the marker is on a road with no one else around, unfortunately, there is maybe not a greater opportunity that the marker could be vandalized, but that something could happen to it and it could go unnoticed for a longer amount of time, which doesn't give us many opportunities to figure out what might have happened to it or, decide on any sort of repercussions or things like that. But if your marker is located in a accessible and public location, then there are more people able to drive past it every day and they notice it. And I am constantly surprised by the amount of people who call me and say, hey, this marker was here yesterday, but it's not there today. What happened to it? And so having that quick response time really helps us with the marker maintenance program.
And of course, we can't control where history happened because that was history. That was the past. The past happened. So if your marker subject is in a rural location and it does not make sense to put it anywhere else, of course, we understand that. We just, it's always nice to have somebody to be able to look out after a marker. Okay, let's go on to a couple other questions. Gary, the type of materials that are located in the Historical Society, we have a lot of materials and you can look on georgiahistory.com. Georgia is all spelled out to kind of get a good idea of what we have based on subject. We have materials ranging from recordings to microfilm and rare pamphlets and documents, artifacts and objects. Books, it's kind of, you name it, if it's an archival collection, we likely have something in it. Now, related to your topic, I am not sure what we have. I would not be surprised if it is not a lot, but we, contact us and we can try to help you, point you in the right direction. Marie, I see you asking about imprints allowed on the marker. So the only image that is allowed on a historical marker is the seal at the top, which is the Georgia Historical Society seal. You are welcome afterwards if you want to add a QR code as a sticker on the aluminum pole or a sign next to it, a smaller sign with a QR code or something, you are more than welcome to do that. But the marker itself, because it is part of a statewide program and they do need to look uniform, we don't allow any additional images. Let's see here. Our next question is, if we want to apply for a marker to interpret an event that has an existing plaque or small monument, do we need the same amount of primary and secondary sources for the application?
Yes. Now we don't have a set requirement for primary or secondary sources used, and it might depend on the original marker that you are referring to, but we would still need to see the resources that were used, but you could certainly use anything that was originally used as a sort of jumping off point or even just as your bibliography, but we would still require an original research paper.
And can a single person request a historical marker or does it have to go through an organization?
So you can start the process, however, you will need to find an organization to help you sponsor the marker. Even if you were to pay the $2,500 out of your pocket, we've found that the organizations tend to be more accessible than individuals. So they help ensure that there is somebody for us to contact if something were to happen to the marker, or there's just more people involved to contact us about the marker. But you can, start that process. And if you're not sure about who to reach out to as a sponsor, Elyse and I can help you with that. You could contact your city itself or the county. We've had a pretty decent amount of cities and counties getting involved with the marker program recently, as people are trying to highlight these local histories that haven't really been recognized before. Markers are a great resource to promote tourism. We have markers listed on our website. We also have an app where you can create a driving trail. And there are a lot of people who are really passionate about these markers across the state, and they do go out of their way to find them. So it's not just something that, identifies history. It's recognizes the history and really pulls people to it.
Thanks, Sabrina. So I'm going to combine these next two questions that I received together because they kind of go hand in hand. So one is, do you accept information from documents such as letters, journals, etc., generated by a family when that family is directly involved in the historical topic of the potential marker? And can we define again primary and secondary sources for the research paper? So these documents generated by the family would be considered a primary source if it happened at the time of the event or building, or it happens at the time of when the event is happening. So that is primary. So a letter that was written around the time, a newspaper article that was around the time discussing the event, recordings, news clips, etc. So basically, when we go into the classroom, we tell the students primary sources are the eyewitnesses to history. Yep. And so consider that your primary source. Was it created around the time that your subject is talking about? So yes, you can use those documents in your research paper. You will also need it backed up by secondary sources, which are those that are written or created later. So this would be a documentary made years later, or a book that was written a couple decades later, examining the event or the person, which basically the analyzing what's happening with those primary sources. So I hope that clears that up a little bit. So yes, you can use letters, journals, these primary sources that are generated by a family or by a local newspaper that is related to your document, to your subject. And then you can also use those secondary sources that were written after the fact to further basically make your case for the historical marker. Okay, I hope that answers it. If not, just feel free to follow up. We're happy to elaborate even more. So Sabrina, are there grants available to assist with this process? And does GHS assist with instructions and help in the process?
So we do not offer grants from GHS. You might be able to research local grants to help with the sponsors portion of the funding. And I am very happy to give you as much instruction as you need, whether that's instructions for how to install the historical marker, how to write your research paper, where to start your research. I am a resource available to all of you. So anytime, feel free to give me a call or send me an email. And depending on what you are asking, it might take me a little bit to get everything put together. But it is my goal to ensure that you are submitting a strong application.
And if you need help with the funding, one of my suggestions is always to look at your subject and see if there are any affiliated organizations with that subject. So if you're submitting an application about education, a specific type of education, what type of educator groups are out there, or if it's related to a church, is there a church association that might be able to assist with the funding of that marker? You can also look at your local businesses. Sometimes they will have small community grants to assist cover the cost. So that's just a few tips for that. Okay, we do have a question about marker sponsors. Can you elaborate on required criteria for an organization to be a project sponsor, following with the approximate number for cost shares in the past, and website information? So Sabrina, I'll let you take the first part, but before you do, currently the cost of a historical marker exceeds $5,000. But at this time, the Georgia Historical Society only requires the sponsoring organization or organizations to cover $2,500 of that cost share. This is subject to change in the future as prices change, but currently that is what the cost is. And if you go to georgiahistory.com/markers, underneath that application checklist, there is a marker sponsor agreement form. If you download that form, you'll be able to see the bulleted points of what a sponsor is agreeing to. So Sabrina, if you could elaborate on what an organization needs.
So like Elyse mentioned, the cost share agreement, the sponsors are responsible for $2,500, but you can have up to 3 sponsors, and you can divide that cost amongst yourselves, or have one sponsoring organization take that on. So a sponsoring organization can be a private business, it could be a nonprofit organization, it could be a local history or heritage organization. We've had groups, initiatives, committees, any sort of collection of people, coalitions, have applied for markers with us in the past.
Yes. And so basically they just need to have a governing board and something that will be around to help us care for these markers in perpetuity. The reason why we don't allow individuals to sponsor a marker and have their name appear in the erected by language is because people move. They may move out of the state. We may not have contact information for them anymore. And so to help ensure that these markers are around for future generations to come, that's why we rely on the sponsors of being organizations to help us with that. So if a sponsoring organization is contemplating a series of markers commemorating a state or nationally significant movement or a thematic grouping with 1 to 3 applications submitted per year over a period of years, is there an additional layer of approval or a different engagement process to be considered from the beginning of the process? So this is where I'll start and then turn it over to Sabrina in case she has anything else to add. But as Sabrina mentioned earlier, the Georgia Historical Society is only able to approve a certain amount per year. Sometimes that number may be greater than the others, but the past few years it has consistently been 5. So if you're submitting more than 1 application, more than likely you are competing against yourself. So we recommend only working on 1 project at a time. Now, this is something that we might want to discuss one-on-one to get a better idea of what your subject is. But we typically do advise only 1 per year. That way you are not competing against yourself. And one of the criteria that the Georgia Historical Marker Review Committee looks at is the diversity across the state, not only in subject, but in location. So are these markers, are they three markers that are going in an underserved area? Was that your idea? Or is it going in a place like Atlanta, Savannah, Augusta, where there are a lot of historical markers? So there are various factors that go into it, but long story to short answer is I would just recommend applying 1 per year. Sabrina, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well, because we do, I think the past couple of years, we've received 20 plus applications. So when it comes down to reviewing them, like Elyse mentioned, the committee looks at where these markers are going. And although it's not the main focus, we want to approve markers that are spread across the state. So if it's between two markers in the same location and a third in another, that would be something that would be considered, and sort of spreading that out if the three applications were equal in their work that they put in with the research paper and documentation sheet and the subject.
Okay, are there any help groups? Are there any groups available to assist for a marker on a specific community, such as African American or Native American communities? There are. I think basically my suggestion would be to do a Google search about the subject that you're interested in the area, and you'll see affiliated groups, whether it's a local organization or a state organization. If it's, Native American community, maybe consider reaching out to a tribal contact, African American community, that you may want to look at local advancement organizations like the NAACP or SCLC or SNCC, depending on what the topic is. It really depends. So if you would like to email us, again, I will put our emails in the chat. That way you can reach out to us, and we can provide some additional information that is specific to your topic. So we still have about 8 minutes left. And so if there are any more questions, we're happy to talk about them. One thing I did want to mention is we spoke briefly about the sponsoring organizations and having a sponsor agreement signed with your application. Another thing that we do need submitted is a property owner easement, which allows the GHS to place the marker on that person's property or the government entity's property. And as we referenced in our discussion about the right-of-way, sometimes you can't get that easement signed until after the fact, and that is fine. We have worked with GDOT before to get this done. Sometimes may add a little bit longer to the process, but we can certainly work that into our timeline. And the same thing, if you are in the city of Savannah or actually any city limits, just go ahead and see if there is any review board that is needed to get the marker in the ground. I know here in Savannah, we have to go through the Metropolitan Planning Commission, depending on where it's located. So you might want to check that as well. So yes, these forms are to be submitted along with the application. The great thing about this submittable is that it gives you the opportunity to upload everything all at once. So your documents, all the documents Sabrina referenced in these forms as well, and any supporting images, maps, etc. So with the forms, we do request that you send them a hard copy in as well, but those do not have to reach us by July 1st, just as long as they're attached to your application, we are good to go. Okay, if we applied for a grant to cover the cost of the marker and we received the grant, will the granting organization need to be listed as a sponsor? If it is not in the grant requirements, then I would say no, they don't have to. If they are just the basically vehicle for the money, then they do not have to be listed. That is the sponsoring organization's preference and the grant agreement, whatever that may say. These are some good questions, y'all. We appreciate you coming and being with us this Thursday. And we look forward to working with you all to help develop the historical marker. Oh, I'm sorry, I just put in Sabrina's wrong email address. Let's see, here you go. Here's the next one. So ebutler@georgiahistory.com and ssaturday@georgiahistory.com. And we're so happy to be able to do this. This is something we hope to do again in the future to answer your questions. And we really want you to work with us with these applications. We do find that applicants that work with us have a greater chance of success than those who don't. So we are glad to see so many of you all, so many familiar names and some new names come out and hear about the process. So like I said, email us and we are happy to help, and we'll be keeping an eye out. You've got roughly almost 4 months to work on this application, so it's not too late to get started. Thank you all. And we'll stick around for a couple more minutes just in case anybody has any additional questions.
Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to.
Oh, and I do see, yes, the Zoom will be available. So we will send this out to our participants. And in the review process, if there are several supporting organizations, it does help to have a couple, but all we require is just one. So if you just have one, that is a-okay. If you have, you can have up to 3 sponsoring organizations on the marker, but that is no way a requirement to have all 3. Thank you, Kristen, and thank you.